For decades, the Vikings came to England for one thing: to raid. They would strike a monastery, steal the silver, and sail away before the king's army could arrive. But in the autumn of 865 AD, the watchmen on the coast saw something completely different. It wasn't a raiding party. It was a fleet of hundreds of ships. And this time, they didn't come for silver. The Anglo-Saxons called them the Great Heathen Army. Thousands of hardened warriors stepped onto the shores of East Anglia. They came for revenge. The legendary Viking king, Ragnar Lothbrok, had been executed by the English king Aella, thrown into a pit of vipers. Now, his sons had arrived to claim the blood debt. The invasion had begun. And England was completely unprepared. In 865, England was not one united country. It was divided into 4 rival kingdoms. The English kings were too busy fighting each other to realize the true danger. The Vikings usually went back to Scandinavia before winter, but this army set up camp. They were staying. Led by the brilliant tactician Ivar the Boneless, they spent the winter preparing. In late 1866, the Great Heathen Army marched north, straight towards the heart of Northumbria. Their target was Eoforwick, known today as York. It was a wealthy city, protected by ancient Roman stone walls. The city was in chaos. King Aella was away, dealing with a civil war for his own throne. Ivar struck when the city was weakest. On November 1st, York fell almost instantly. The Vikings now held the capital of the north. When King Aella heard the news, he finally understood the gravity of his mistake. He joined forces with his rival, raised a massive army, and marched back to York to crush the heathens. But Ivar the Boneless didn't panic. He was waiting for them. On March 21st, 867, the combined English army arrived at the walls of York. They found the defenses surprisingly weak. They smashed through the walls and rushed inside. The English soldiers poured into the narrow streets, thinking they had caught the Vikings off guard. But as they pushed deeper into the city, the streets were eerily empty. It was a perfectly executed trap. Ivar had let them in on purpose. The English army was completely surrounded in the claustrophobic alleys. Then, the slaughter began. The Viking horde descended from the walls, crushing the English shield wall from all sides. In the brutal close-quarters combat, there was no room to swing a sword, only to die. King Osbert was struck down and killed in the mud. The Northumbrian army was utterly annihilated. But King Aella was not allowed to die in battle. He was taken alive. Aella was dragged into the great hall, forced to his knees before the sons of Ragnar. They had waited years for this moment. A simple execution would not be enough. For the man who murdered their father, they demanded the most horrifying ritual in Norse mythology. The Blood Eagle. According to the sagas, the victim's ribs were severed from his spine and pulled backward to resemble the bloody wings of a giant eagle. Aela's agonizing screams echoed through the cold stones of York. And with his death, the kingdom of Northumbria died with him. The Great Heathen Army had avenged Ragnar Lothbrok, but they did not stop there. Fueled by their victory, Ivar turned his terrifying machine south. The kingdoms of Mercia and East Anglia realized too late. The Vikings were no longer raiding. They were here to conquer all of England. Over the next decade, the Great Heathen Army tore through England like a storm. The Kingdom of Mercia was forced to pay heavy tribute. East Anglia was utterly destroyed. King Edmund of East Anglia refused to submit to the heathen gods and was martyred by Viking arrows. Half of England was now under direct Viking control, a vast territory that would become known as the Danelaw. Then, the invaders did something unexpected. They stopped marching. They began to farm. The Great Heathen Army slowly disbanded. They built towns, traded goods, became permanent settlers. By 871, only one independent Anglo-Saxon kingdom remained standing, Wessex. It was ruled by a young, fiercely intelligent king named Alfred. He alone would stand against the remaining Viking warlords in a brutal conflict that would decide the fate of the English nation. The Great Heathen Army didn't just win a war. They permanently changed the bloodline culture and history of an entire island. They came for revenge, but they stayed for an empire.